and to discuss the topic at hand. Like Joe said, I am a farmer, started last year, my soon-to-be wife and I did, and we chose to exclusively be a no-till farming operation for a couple different reasons. A lot of it's going to be discussed today with these guys, and actually one of my neighbors and mentors actually here today on the panel, and that's what we're here today to learn from and experience. So what we're going to do, Jim has already talked today, and he's just going to briefly give a little bit of an introduction for anybody who wasn't here. If you would like to grab the mic and just say hi and a little bit about just your farm, location, and like I said, type of farm, and how long you've been implementing no-till on your farm.
Hi, how many weren't here to my session? Okay, a few of you. All right, so I'm Jim Hershey from Elizabethtown, Lancaster County, and yeah, our operation consists of corn, soybeans, wheat, and we also have a large broiler operation along with a hog finishing operation. So I've been no-tilling for 30 some years, I guess, and cover cropping, I don't know, 12, 14, 15 years.
Okay. And we're going to hit on a few more of the topics as we get going through. If you want to go ahead, actually, if we can go to Donn, we're going to show some photos from Donn's operation.
Thanks.
As they go through here. So.
I stand up so I see what I'm talking about. Oh, this is one of a picture. Oh, they got Chad and myself up there too. How about that? Picture of one of our fields that we did some bio strip till. We got our 40-foot grain drill rigged up with 2 seed metering systems of Elmar and then the box drill, and Chad worked hard at setting it up so that we can configure it so we can do the bio strip till where we will seed non-overwintering species in what will be the corn row the following year, and we put overwintering species in the corn row, and so far it's worked pretty nice. I can give you a quick rundown. In between the rows, we have purple bounty vetch, woolly vetch, purple top turnip, rye, sunflower, medium red clover, fixation clover, crimson clover, and I'm going to talk fast because we don't have a lot of time maybe. And in the bio strip rows, in the rows itself, we have sorghum sudan grass, German foxtail millet, soybeans, and radish. And it worked pretty good, you know, pretty impressed the way it looked last fall, the way it looked this spring. This is a spring picture. And if you advance it, Bryan, that's a picture of the field after it was planted. We plant with a 16-row planter. You can see the wheel tracks from the planter, this spot here, and then over. You see the passes where the tractor wheels run the cover crop down, but it worked out pretty good. This was the first field we planted this spring when we could finally get out there and conditions were permissible. We have row cleaners on the planter. Our corn and soybeans are all planted on twin row setups. We use Kinsey planters, and we're doing twin 8-inch rows. So we have 22 inches between the rows. And if you go to the next one, this was from a different field. They're not quite in order, but this was a different field. This was June 10th. And this particular field, with a picture of the roller in front, if you look to the right, off to the right, you can see right here where he pulled in with a roller and started rolling in front of me. This part was rolled, this part was not. Again, June 10th. This had the vetch in there was waist high and better. I started planting there. Conditions were not very conducive. We were pressed for time, being June 10th. Anybody that has crop insurance, that's your cutoff date for preventive planting. But the ground was quite wet yet, wetter than I would. Had it been a normal year, earlier in the season, I would not be there. But where we weren't rolling it when I first started, problem I was having between the mud and the cover crop, the vetch was wrapping around the planter, some causing some fits. So Chad came up and we talked about it and said, well, what the hell, let's try rolling it in front of it. The most important thing rolling in front of a planter is that you have your orientation figured out, that you roll it the same way you're going to plant it. You don't want to roll the opposite way you're going to plant, because it's like going against the hair of the dog. You pick it all up and it really can cause you fits. But if you go to the next one, Brian. Actually, this was a video. I don't know if it'll work or not, probably not, but it shows the row cleaners on the planter. And I do things from the seat of my pants, as you can tell. I took the iPad out of the holder and flipped it around, was holding it over my shoulder, watching it run. Crude pictures, but you can see that the row cleaners are running between the rows of standing cover crop, kind of spreading it apart, and it works slicker than shit. I can't say any better. It worked fantastic. And go to the next one, Brian. This was a picture taken about a week ago of, you can see the slots, seed slots. This was after we airflowed some nitrogen out, but you can see how some areas of seed slots, even though we've got different types of closing wheels, spiked wheels, and several different configurations on there in those wet conditions, doesn't much matter what you do, you're gonna have challenges trying to close that slot. Biggest problem you can have if you got too much weight on there and you close that slot too tight, the seeds have to fight like hell to try to get out. And we've encountered that years ago, that we had the seed slot closed so tight that the seeds couldn't get out of the ground. If you go to the next slide, Brian. Just another picture of what the corn kind of looks like in that same field where we had rolled the cover crop down. Or that might be from the field. No, that was from the field that did not get rolled, sorry. Showing that some of the biomass between the rows. Real happy the way that looks. Go to the next picture, Brian. That was a test plot. We do a lot of test plots for shits and giggles. Now, I'm gonna ask your forgiveness for the way I talk, but this is the way I talk. I'm sorry. I tell it like it is, I show it like it is, I do it like it is, but this was a test strip that we left in the biostrip till field that we did not put any cover crop on. We're gonna follow that through harvest. Follow that one through harvest, and I guess we harvested that one. But obviously with the yield monitor on the combine, the mapping and scales on our grain carts and everything, that we're gonna follow that one through harvest. We also did, in another section of that field, we did some cover crop trials with King Agri Seed with some European varieties. We had 10 different varieties that we put in, and that was all planted with GPS, so that the cover crop was put in with a drill with GPS. The corn was planted with a corn planter with GPS, and it will be harvested with a combine with a GPS, so that we'll be able to track all those different species within that field and try to get some yield data information. And due to technical difficulties here,
You want to just give a quick synopsis of the size of your farm?
we operate just under 1,600 acres. Cash grains, some alfalfa in rotation for neighboring dairy farm, and processing vegetables. We deal with processing vegetables. I started dabbling with no-till 31 years ago, very cautiously, tiptoeing into it. 96, bought a planter set up with zone till, set up on it the Throsson 3-coulter system. 99, I believe it was, I bought the Underfirth strip till machine, and as Jim said earlier, you never look back. You just keep going forward. Everything we've done has been positive impact. Most positive thing I've seen with our no-till and strip till, particularly strip till, is putting some nutrients down in the slot where the corn plants are going to be. We've been able to reduce our application rates of nutrients. We've been able to increase our yields. I'd like to say it had an economical impact, but when you look back what fertilizer cost 30 years ago and what it is nowadays, or what it had been, that even though you reduce the rates, you're still spending a certain number of dollars per acre. But our corn yields, 5-year average is 175 bushel right now, as of today, and that ranges from 108 bushel in 2016 up to 211 bushel the following year. So we had a 100 bushel swing from one year to the next. Soybeans, our 5-year average is just under 55 bushel, and that goes from 47 bushel to 69 bushel. We just finished cereal rye and oats. Cereal rye averaged a little over 98 bushel and almost 3 tons of straw to the acre. That was a real bonus since we got it sold in the field. Oats averaged 143 bushel. We had one piece went 163, and I've never grown oats that have yielded like that, but Chad said there was areas in the field that they were running up to 215. I don't know what we did for sure. Management, we focus on our small grains, modeled after what we did with wheat when we grow wheat. That nitrogen management, fungicide applications, attention, attention, attention. Seeding rates, you need to start out when you put the seed in the ground, focusing on seeding rates. I could spend all day up here, sorry. But I don't know, is there any more pictures? Or? Yeah. And this is the same field where our test plot skip is. I took that a week ago or so, an overview of it, so just to see if there was any visual difference looking at it. We did go out and do some PSNT tests on this probably 3 weeks ago, and when we were pulling the PSNT test, the first response I heard was that the soil was softer where we had cover crop than where we had no cover crop, but PSNT tests actually came back lower PSNT nitrogen on the cover crop than on the bare ground, which surprised me a little bit. But and that's the field, kind of a rough overview of the field where we were rolling the cover crop down on June 10th. Kind of hard to get a real good aerial view of it, but that field looks, for June 10th and 12th, the corn looks damn good right now. It's got a ways to go to finish, but the intention is it'll all come off as grain, but color is good, the vigor seems good, stalk size is good, and is at the end of my pictures. Oh, now we're on to John, and he's doing stuff similar to us, but.
Hi there, I'm John Macauley. I farm with my dad and my brother in Groveland, New York on Macauley Farms. We got 980 tillable acres, and we also have a 100 cow-calf operation. We started no-tilling in 2009 and started cover crops in 2012. By 2014, we decided to go all in and do 100% no-till. We also started planting green that year. We've had a lot of positives there planting green, and there's been some failures, but nothing was all that bad, maybe like 5 bushel difference, but nothing all that horrible. And we started off planting green by accident. We never got it burned down early enough there to start planting, and we just said, let's go and get it all planted. So we've been planting a lot, and I'm hoping eventually to get down to where I can decrease my inputs there and start putting more money in my pocket instead of dealing it out to the fertilizer companies. This is one of the mixtures that we do. It's an 11-way cover crop mix there. We put after wheat. It's got cereal rye, hairy vetch, crimson clover, buckwheat, pearl millet, and oats, and a couple other things in that. This is it. When we rolled it down there, this is the first time we used a roller crimper, was this year. My dad there, we got a 12-row corn planter there, and this year's a 15-foot roller. My dad was going about 8 miles an hour ahead of the corn planter to keep up, and we planted about 3.5, 4 miles an hour with the corn planter. This is another field. This is when we first started off planting green. This is before we started rolling things. This is mostly just wheat and oats mix. This is really one of our first starting fields that we did. This is that field with the roller crimper there that we did. And my dad, he'd always just stay about 30 feet in front of the corn planter there. That way, if it ever rained out, you would be able to get right back on there and get it planted again. If not, it'll be too wet to get back on. And this is a field day that we're having at our farm there. I got a bunch of test plots in there, and I think we got 4 mixes and a check, and we replicated that 3 times, so that should be good.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, guys. So we're going to get into some of the questions that we're going to try and see what these guys have had some experiences with. Everybody touched on it, that they started no-tilling and stuff, but I wanted to ask each one of you, and maybe we'll start with Donn since the mic's in front of him. What were some of the obstacles that you first encountered? You said back in 96, 99 there. What were some of the first obstacles to get over when you started no-tilling?
Peer pressure. That was it. Everybody said, what the hell is he doing? And then I started getting questions, what are you going to do next? Probably the biggest obstacle was not knowing for sure. You know, I was going 100% away from the way I was brought up to do things. But fortunately, there's enough people out there doing things like this and like that, particularly nowadays, that there's people you can get in touch with and run things by them. And networking with people is just fantastic. But again, peer pressure. I can't say enough good about it, what they did. They made me. The more I'm the kind of guy. The more you tell me I can't do something, God damn it, I'm going to do it.
So for me, it was I did not have the right equipment. So that was the challenge. I had an old Case IH Cyclo planter. I think it was a 300. Not enough old you guys in here to remember that. But anyway, it was not designed to no-till. It had no-till coulters on, which I learned years later that you do not need no-till coulters on your corn planter. And that could be a whole discussion in itself. But yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me was I didn't have the right equipment, and that's the kind of results I got. But realizing that I had to do something about it, I was able to update planters.
Thank you. Yeah.
Some of mine, I guess, was also peer pressure there too. A lot of farmers drove by there, and they're just, "What is this kid doing?" You know, his father's let him do this stuff for what? And I don't know, other parts there, you know, we had some bugs there. I call up the chemical companies there. The rep came out there, and I had a bunch of different bugs that were, you know, eating my crop there when we first started doing this. And geez, you know, you're the only one in the county that's got these bugs. Well, once we started getting more cover crops and stuff and getting more predatory bugs, a lot of them have started to go away, and we've cut way back on the insecticide and pesticide use that we do. So.
I'm just going to add that back in 1998, when I first dabbled in it, I had a 3-acre piece of ground. If you didn't have an airplane and a pilot's license, you couldn't see it. I was reading the Successful Farming and Farm Journal where guys out west were no-tilling corn with John Deere 7000 planters. I thought, I've got a 6-row 7000 planter that I use. So that spring I said, I'm going to try it. No special attachments, didn't have any idea what I was doing. Just set the depth a little deeper and went out and planted that 3 acres of corn. And when I harvested it that fall, I said, you know, this isn't so much worse than what's up front that got tillage and all that. And I said it was a whole lot easier planting it. You know, one pass, I'm done. This was before we were doing side dress and things like that. And we've certainly moved a whole lot further forward since then. But I guess the biggest thing and the point I can impress the most on you is try something even if it seems so bizarre and impractical, that sometimes you try things that are way out in left field and son of a bitch, there could be some potential to it.
All right, thank you very much for that. So we saw some of how they got started into no-tilling, and John touched on it there, and maybe you can pick back up on it. How did you get into, so we started no-tilling, but how did you start integrating cover crops into your farming operation? And then you started touching on about the pest management, how you got a benefit from that. So maybe if I could ask each one of you how you started with cover crops and how you're implementing those into your farming operation.
So we got in the no-till there through the NRCS, one of their equip programs there, and then that sort of, after 3 years there, that went away, and I don't know, the next thing it was, I get the No-Till Farmer magazine there, and I was reading in there, you know, a lot of these guys are doing cover crops. Also, I started to think about that, and I looked into NRCS again through the equip program there, and they had a cover crop program. So I got into that, and it just, one thing led to another there, and we started out with a 3-way mix of radishes, Austrian winter peas, and oats for a quick one there, and we did that for 3 years, tossing a little crimson clover, and then after that it just progressed, and I don't know, I'll be digging around there in the springtime there, and I'll see these little black beetles there down in the stubble. Well, from what I've read and what I've seen at the No-Till conference and that, those little black beetles there, they're eating the slugs that are in your fields. And there's a bunch of stuff, as soon as you move that mat away, I mean, there's a whole different life cycle down there of things that are just crawling around, and it's just amazing.
When I started using cover crops, it was cereal rye. And I think my first thought was, I need to do this to help hold the soil or hold the water better. You know, we do have slope on our farm, and I was doing no-tilling, and so they were starting to talk about how cover crops can reduce runoff. And I thought, well, hey, that makes sense. So I started with cereal rye, and I did cereal rye for a number of years, and I was sure to, you know, burn it off earlier than I should have, had I known what I know now. But yeah, that was my program, and it wasn't until 10 years ago maybe that I started integrating some other species, and we can talk about that later.
Yep, we're gonna get into the species and stuff.
My first experience with cover crops was medium red clover and wheat. That was a common practice in our area years ago. Back in the early 70s or so, a fertilizer company I worked for, I used to run the Argo 6-wheeled vehicle that had a spin spreader on the back, and I did about 1,200 acres with that one year, and that was putting clover in your wheat. And that's what I started out when I started farming in '79. We would do some frost seeding of clover on what wheat we had. A few years later, we would put some cereal rye on some of the fall harvested crops, because that's what some of the neighbors did. That was my introduction to cover crops.
Thank you. So now we know that we're starting into the cover crops. I'm just going to transition into part of what we're here to discuss today, which is planting green. So if maybe, Jim, if you wanted to start maybe talking about the species you're utilizing and talk about how that can integrate into your farming system and maybe planting green.
So I think the first mix that I ever, multi-species mix, would have been the crimson clover, radish, annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and vetch. And that there mix I was introduced to by some of my fellow cover croppers that said, you know, you need to get legumes in there. You can benefit a lot by using, having legumes in your mix, and a brassica, and also some sort of grass, cereal grain, whatever it might be. And so I used that probably for 3 years, but the biggest mistake I made was seeding rates were way too high. And it was back then when some of these seeds were just being introduced, they were rather expensive. I mean, I was spending upwards to $50 an acre on that cover. And then as I got around and started listening to some other fellows, they said, you know, you reduce those rates and also consider maybe not as many species in that mix. So back when this whole generation of cover cropping started, and there are still some that will say, hey, you got to plant a 13-way mix. I'm not convinced of that, or a 12-way mix, but I will say last week, no, this is Wednesday, isn't it? I guess it's just this week. I planted a 12-way mix just for giggles. Orchard grass, cow peas, white clover, Berseem clover, sweet yellow clover, radish, millet, flax, buckwheat, oats, vetch, and wheat. And that I planted because some people are saying, you know, planting a cover crop after wheat, especially if wheat is in your program, that can be a really, really good practice to get in. You're setting the crop, you're setting the stage for next year's cash crop that you're going to plant. It's really difficult for me to give up double crop soybeans. We typically harvest in our area 50 bushel wheat beans. And so the economics still isn't there, but I need to take into consideration what these cover crops are going to do for my soil for next year. So I didn't do a lot of acres, but I'm going to give it a try. Next year, next spring, we'll plant corn, and we'll see what the yield is.
I guess when we first started out, we did a little bit of wheat there also. And what I didn't like about the wheat there is it doesn't get real tall after you plant it, and you go to plant corn in there and it sort of shades out your corn plants there. It makes them all spindly and stuff. So we started growing with a taller cover crop there, and that way we can roll it down and it gets flat, and it suppresses the weeds that we got. Like we got Roundup resistant mare's tail there, and that really helps suppress that down quite a bit. And more diversification there. It's always, I don't know, if you have something that doesn't grow, at least you got, 10 other things that are going to grow on your fields. Give it a shot.
Well, with our different species mixed and seeing what others have seen out in the West, that there's something about mixing these different species together that adds fuel to the fire. They feed off one another and enhance the growth. We talk about multi-species mixes, but you have to cut your seeding rates. You don't use recommended seeding rates by most companies. When I look at seeding rates, what we did on our bio strip till, the in-between row part, the vetch, we were running 1.8 pounds of the Purple Bounty, 1.8 of the Woolly, 0.78 of Purple Top Turnip. And we kind of decided that might be a little too much, because you need, at that time we didn't look at seeds per pound as closely. Well, you start looking at seeds per pound and you take turnip seed and it is about the size of a pinhead. But rye, we were running 9 pounds of that, 5 pounds of sunflower. Sunflowers make your neighbors really, really happy. They really appreciate that. We've had a few ask us already this summer, are you going to plant more sunflowers this year? They really like that. Matter of fact, Chad put a sign up last year on the one field, free sunflowers, help yourself, make everybody's day brighter. And you would not believe the traffic flow, the cars. There'd be 3-4 cars at a time stopped. There are people out there picking sunflowers. You know, it's just good public relations. Medium red clover, 3 3/4 pounds. Fixation, 1.8. Crimson, 1.8. Then we get down to the in the row part. Radish, £1.25. Sorghum Sudan, 2.5. Foxtail millet, 2.5. Soybeans, 11 pounds. So we cut the rates back. We try to keep our seed costs somewhere around $35 an acre, in that range, or 35, 25. Okay, he's correcting me, but you know, we've had good luck with the multi-species part of it. Like John said, if one doesn't want to grow, something else will pick up for it. Clover seems to be the toughest one to get going, particularly this time of the year. But After your small grains, that is a grand opportunity to get some cover crops in and do some things. You've got a good growing season. You know, you can get your warm season cover crops in. You can throw some of the cooler seasons one in, and they all seem to work together. Once you get into the fall time, fall harvest, that's when you start limiting yourself to what you can do. That's where cereal rye fits in pretty good. But again, focus on your seeding rate. If you want a cover crop that's going to be a smothered crop, you plant it really heavy. If you want a cover crop that's just going to be a moderate cover crop, you plant it light.
Thank you. Next, I want to start, as we're building discussion here, looking towards planting green. So I guess we could start with John maybe and ask, how long have you been experimenting with planting green? And what was your main rationale for maybe trying that?
I don't know, my main thing for planting green was just really to, I don't know, just have something out there and growing. And I don't know, when we first started doing it, we really didn't know what exactly we were doing. I asked one of the seed dealers that I was getting seed from, you know, how much of this stuff should I be putting down? And he gave me rates, and we did it that way. And I don't know, we were a little bit too high. And then we started, you know, look at other things there of, you know, nitrogen values of the hairy vetch and the Austrian winter peas, and, you know, try to build some of this more nutrients. And I don't know, it just, I don't know, it just happened that, I don't know, the yields never went down, and it's been a plus, you know, keeping all your soil in one place. And it was sort of something there, just back in June we had 4.5 inches of rain there all at one time. And my neighbor there, they were planning on putting some, I think it was an alfalfa seeding he was going to put in. And we were still planting soybeans in that, and that rain, when that came down, he had the ground just fitted. It was beautiful, you know, how much he had it just fit right up there, and that's how we used to do it. And boy, when that rain came down, it just washed all that topsoil off of his top field, and it's a slopey field there a little bit, and it washed it all right down to the creek. And my field right next to that, we had no-till corn in there, and that just had some sort of a grass that was growing in there because we didn't get a chance to get it cover cropped, and it was all just, everything was holding together. But it had cover crops on there probably 2 years prior to that, and it just, all those roots in there just intertwining together just held all that soil together. It's just been good ever since.
So I planted cover crop. The first time that I planted cover crop was just, as I mentioned, just strictly to keep the soil covered. I had no idea that was the start of the generation of where we are today with soil health. It wasn't until, doesn't seem that long ago, that this soil health movement really kicked in gear, and we're testing our soils for soil health. Just like back here, Cornell has an example back there of a forested sample of soil compared to long-term moldboard plow. What is that? Well, anyway, I was only planting green into corn because I thought you still had to do some sort of light tillage in soybeans for soybeans. And I owned a Great Plains Turbo Till for a number of years, but it sat for probably 3 years before I realized that, you know, I'm not going to use this thing again, so it went out the lane. But now I'm trying to focus my cover crop program on things that are going to benefit the soil and benefit my cash crop.
Well, I started planting green back around 2007, and it was just at that moment, out of desperation. I wanted to get a crop in the ground, and we do most of our own spraying. So I'm looking at, okay, do I spray kill it and wait a few days for it kind of decimate a little bit, or do I go out and plant the crop first and then take care of it afterwards? I decided at that point I'm going to plant the crop, plant the corn, and I'm going to take care of the cover crop afterwards. So that's how I got started at it. But like again, not knowing what I was doing for sure, but I've tried something.
Maybe while you have the mic, what are on a year like this spring, which especially in Western New York, we had a very wet spring. I know in Central New York they did too. On a year like this, what advantages, if any, did you see with utilizing the planting green? Were there any for you?
Well, in some situations it helped dry the ground out. In some situations it seemed to keep it wet a little longer. Depends. A lot of it depends on the soil type and your drainage. But you know, when you get down to June 10th and June 12th, you throw everything out the window. You know, you got Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Sometimes you just got to go. But challenges, if I've ever had a challenge with maybe not so much planting, somewhat planting green. We'd strip till into either alfalfa sod or clover sod. 2016. That exceptionally dry season we went through where we had clover, even though we terminated the clover just prior to planting and strip tilled into it, that clover had sucked enough moisture out, and even though it had been technically properly terminated with the proper chemicals, the dry spell we went through, the clover was not actively growing. It just kind of stood still for a few weeks, and the chemical efficacy decimated, and then we started getting some rain, and the clover came back to life. And that moisture that it sucked out of the ground, it really hurt corn yields, and it just dried it out so much, set it back, that you get to a point where there's not much chance of recovery. But alfalfa, that's another thing. You know, we've got a lot of neighbors that'll take first cutting hay off and then try planting corn into it. And boy, if you don't have the right spring, it can really bite you hard. But and we're growing all non-GMO crops, corn and soybeans. So we don't have the luxury to go in afterwards with glyphosate and clean our crops up. We have to use some other herbicide programs. But at this point, we're not going away from the non-GMO. It's worked out good for us. So.
Oh, it was the cover crops there. They were holding some moisture in there this year, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other fields that we had. And I called up one of my neighbors there that he does a lot more of the cover crops than I do. And I asked him, I go, how's the plant conditions that you're going through right now? I go, we still got a little bit of, it's still muddy there where the cover crops are. Well, he goes, you either plant it or else you don't. And I know we said, well, let's give it a try. And we planted it, and it's turned out really good. The seed slot didn't close quite like what it should. And it was still a little bit open on some of it, but with all the moisture we had and everything we got going on with the soil, it just, I don't know, every plant germed there for the most part there. And I don't know, it seems like a nice way of doing it there. At least some of our fields there were pretty muddy that we did, and we never really had perfect conditions that we were going into this year. But I know a lot of the stuff that I seen worked. It took a lot longer to get it dried out, and it was just, there were big clumps that they were going through, and we just dropped the planter in and went, and it's really turned out to be a good thing we did that this year.
I'm not from New York, so can I still talk?
Oh yeah, we
Pennsylvania had challenges too, but not what you guys had here, especially southeast. Southern Pennsylvania wasn't as wet as what northern Pennsylvania was, but this is the second year in a row that I asked myself, after planting and after I seen the stand of corn, why didn't I start planting sooner? There is something about planting into green, the soil structure, and it is really hard to explain. But 2 years ago especially, we had a wet spring, and we planted some I don't know, a third of our corn, and we just said, you know what, we gotta quit. We are not happy with what we're seeing. We're gonna quit. It went 4 weeks before we got back into the field again. That early planted corn was the best corn we had, and we said, this year, 2019, we need to remember that. And we did remember that. And we said, all right, I don't know, but you know what we said last year? The early planted corn did the best, and we should have planted earlier. So April 23rd, we started, and we said, man, this just seems a little wet. But there was so much, there was roots from the cover crop that you could not make a mud ball. You could not make a mud ball. We did not plant at all, but we should have. It's our best corn again. The corn is just even from one end of the field to the other. Again, we had 3 weeks where we waited to get back in. Now the second crop corn doesn't look bad, but still doesn't look as good as the early planted corn. So yes, there are situations, but we haven't had them for a while, where you say, well, this cover crop, if I let it grow, it's going to suck all the moisture out and be a detriment to my newly seeded corn because of not enough moisture. But I have not experienced that for a number of years. You can plant into conditions that are more marginal and wetter soils, wetter moisture, than what you can if you don't have a green living cover.
Great, thank you very much. While you have the mic there, Don, we're kind of getting close on time here. If we can get a take-home message, you guys have been great about sharing a lot of your experiences and stuff, and if we could get one take-home message to share with everybody else here out of each one of you, just to kind of wrap up, and then we'll see if we can have any questions from the crowd.
I guess one take-home message is, give it a shot. I mean, even if you do just, an acre of it just to try something new. I mean, sure, it might be a failure, but it's always a process that you got to be thinking about all the time of what you're going to do next, in that situation. And I don't know, you can go out there and you can plow a field and fit it down and just plant right into it, and it'll look perfect, when you get it up and growing. But I don't know, the one thing you got, your soil health, is a big thing of what we discovered, and I don't know, just try something new for today. Even if it's the wrong thing to do, it's going to take a couple of years to get it built up. And it's not, a one-day fix it. It takes years to get, to where you get it figured out, and even when you think you got it figured out, something will toss a curveball in there, Mother Nature or something, and you just got to keep on plugging along.
So there is still a lot of tillage in New York and in Pennsylvania. And I just would encourage those that have done it, have done no-till, and have done cover crops, and have planted green, and understand soil health, that you just take those farmers out for breakfast some morning and just share with them what your experiences have been. Just try to encourage them to maybe try a little bit. We're not asking for half your farm or 30 your farm, or maybe it's only 25-acre field somewhere. Just give it a try, and don't give up the first year, because it's not always successful. There are some that would say that there's a 3-year drag or learning, but I think there's enough of us, enough of yous around now that have done it, that can encourage, and they can learn from what your mistakes were.
Thank you.
I guess all I can say, similar to what John and Jim said and what I said earlier, is be brave, be willing to try something, even on a small scale. I realize with some of our neighbor farms around us, the size of their operation and the crops that they grow, that this reduced till and cover crops and all that might not fit in their operation quite as good as a smaller size operation. But you know, you got to be realistic about what can work on your farm and what won't. But try something, you'll be amazed.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys all very much for sharing that with us today. And we do have a few minutes, so I'm sure there's got to be some questions out there.
You know, I wanted to say this earlier, but for those that are learning and want to try no-till, I'm at the point where I'm willing to try some organic production. And I have not ever thought that I would be in a position to say, you know what, I really need to try some of it because of where I'm at in this whole journey. I'm doing the planting green. I've reduced my herbicides. I've reduced my commercial fertilizer inputs. Now, why don't I take it to the next level and don't use any commercial fertilizer, enhance my cover crop program, and see what happens? So this next year, there will be an effort to do a few acres, and some of that came from the field day that we just had several weeks ago. Rick Clark, if you ever get an opportunity to listen to Rick Clark from Indiana, 7,000 acre crop farm, and this was a transition for him. Now I'm thinking he's up to a third of his acres are cover crop, or are organic production. And he's taken it step by step. And I think I'm at that point where next year there'll be a conscious effort to try and transition some. So, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty neat. Question?
Yes, Don, can you tell us why you are experimenting or trying European corn varieties?
No, actually, they're not. Oh, European cover crop species. Yeah. I guess trying that because Agriculture works with some of the European companies, and European countries in some aspect have been light years ahead of us in cover crops and equipment technology. So they've some different breeding stock. A lot of what we use in the United States right now for what we call cover crops were just crops that were developed years ago, and all of a sudden they got a new name the last few years, a cover crop. You know, same species, same what do I say, genetic makeup and that. No, I know down in Beltsville, Maryland, they are trying to breed some new vetches and breed some new species of cover crops that fit different areas better. But you know, I know Rod over here, Rod Porter from his King Agri business could explain maybe a little better than I can. But again, I feel that the European countries have been ahead of us, and we're catching up, but slowly.
Go ahead.
Daddy wanted to ask, when you started using the cover crop, what the period of time we've changed like the bio makeup of the soil, different root systems and that. Was there a certain time that it leveled out? How many years did it take to achieve nutrition?
It's to increase organic matter has been quite a battle, actually. Slowly doing it. When we first started doing reduced till with a zone till and not using cover crops as per se, I thought, man, with all this reduced tillage and that, our organic matter is going to start climbing like crazy. Well, after a number of years, the organic matter kind of pretty much just stayed the same. Now with cover crops, we're slowly increasing, but I guess I'd say the biggest change in the soil structure I've seen years ago, talking with people from Ohio that were taking all their no-till attachments off their planter, don't need them anymore. Our soil texture has changed enough that we don't need all that equipment on there to get seed in the ground. At that time, I said, shit, there ain't no way in hell I'll be able to do that. Our ground's so damn hard. Hell, when I had that 12-row zone till planter, I put fertilizer hopper extensions on it, and I had weight brackets on it to put more weight on the planter to penetrate the ground in the early years. But then I was still planting up into mid-July because we were still planting string beans late in the season. So early in the season, when you had adequate soil moisture, ground penetration was pretty easy. But when you get up in the latter part of July, when the ground's drying out, particularly on wheat stubble or something like that, the ground was like concrete and trying to penetrate the ground. And that's when I said, oh, no way we could take our stuff off. Well, now I'm a believer that, yeah, you can take some of that stuff off as your soil structure changes. That we're doing a lot of no-tilling now. We still do some strip tilling, but majority of our ground gets no-tilled either with a no-till drill or the no-till planters. And I couldn't believe at the time that your soil structure would change enough that you'd be able to do that, but it has improved. Water infiltration is another huge eye-opener, huge. Get a heavy rainfall and you drive around and look at neighboring fields and your fields, and where's the water running off, where's it ponding, where's it not. Water infiltration is huge.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for our panelists? Right here.
An ironic question, because I was going to ask, when you're transitioning to no-till, what are the attachments that you think are most important? So kind of the opposite of where you were headed, but for a lot of people who are just getting started, some attachments are more expensive than others, and what was your experience, and what advice would you give to farmers starting out?
I think soil types make a huge difference because limestone ground compared to a heavy loam soil are going to require a different type of closing wheel. So to say that there's one given recipe on how your planter should be set up, I would say, no, I better not. I was going to say you don't need any no-till coulter, but I think that would be the first thing to take a look at. If your soils have a good enough structure and you didn't beat them up over the years, you can probably, the first thing to get rid of is your no-till coulter. Row cleaners are necessary in a situation where you're just starting no-till, I think, especially if you have crop residue, corn stalks or hay ground or something like that.
Down the pressure. First thing you're going to have to do to your planter is make sure you've got heavy down pressure springs or airbags or some way that you can manually put more down pressure on your seed openers so you can penetrate the ground. Most planters, that is the biggest downfall right now. You cannot get the ground penetration. You start putting no-till coulters on. Okay, you got a coulter up front and then your seed coulters. Now you've increased ground contact, so you need more pressure there. There's an outfit that makes kind of a notched seed disc that came available the last couple of years. Well, the latest reports I read on that it takes, I forget the number exactly, but how many more 100 pounds of down pressure it takes on those openers to penetrate the ground versus a standard smooth seed disc. And part of it is because those notched seed discs are a little thicker. They might be, instead of 3.5 millimeters, they might be 4 or 5 millimeters, but the thickness in the notch, and this is an outfit that does a lot of studying with planter attachments, but we've got 2 rows on our bean planter set up with those coulters, and I was kind of shocked when I read that this summer, that how much more down pressure it takes on that. Have we noticed it? No. Have we looked? No. Things look all right, but down pressure and also lift capability. You kind of need, you can't just pound it in the ground down pressure would be the first thing I would look at.
One of the biggest things is when you first start doing this, you want to make sure you got sharp blades. Your seed opener blades, they got to be sharp. You got dull ones on there, it's just not going to penetrate like the sharp ones will, especially cutting through all this residue that we cut through. The shark tooth roll cleaners, I really like those because they don't wrap. They just sort of push it out of the way. And I'm not running them, I'm just clearing just a little bit of a path. Most of the time they're up enough where they're not even touching anything really at all. And I know I also like one spike wheel on the back and one OEM tire on there. It gives you a bunch of different planning scenarios you can go through. But there's a whole bunch of different options out there, and like probably both of you, I got just spots there sitting in the shed with different closing attachments I've tried, different openers, and you get a lot of stuff, but it's just, you got to figure out what's going to work best on your farm.
Cool. Well, once again, I want to thank the panelists again for sharing with us today, and how about one more round of applause for them. And thank you for coming.